What's a small town dark secret, you know? An extremely wealthy grandma had an affair with a pool boy. He called it quits and ended him with her car accidentally. I don't remember if she actually caught a charge for it, but she didn't do any time. The family knows it was deliberate, talks about it nonchalantly like, don't make grandma angry, she harmed the last man that crossed her. Wait, what? I can only imagine dating some girl in the family and laughing off the stories about grandma like, oh yeah, she's the, typical crazy in a good way, old kind of lady. Then you find out grandma isn't kidding. Story 2. Brother and sister slept together. Everyone found out. The sister disappeared for almost 10 years. Rumor was she ended it all out of embarrassment. Out of the blue, she popped back up one day hoping we'd all forgotten. Nobody forgot, but nobody mentions it either. Story 3. The quote-unquote devil house. Now, it's been around my hometown for decades. Enough different generations of kids had their own mythos. I had an English teacher that went to the same school in the late 80s. By then, it was vacant, but someone had painted a pentagram on the wall. You had to know where it was, pull over on the old highway coming into town at a certain point. There was no driveway or anything, but you could see a gate if you knew where to look. Then you go into the woods a bit, and bam, it almost appears out of nowhere on you. And that's how well it was hidden. For the most part, every high school class would have a couple of people venture out to see it and leave their own small mark. Everyone was just sure Satanists or witches were meeting there occasionally. But later, I found out the real story from my dad. I'd asked him, but he didn't make the connection between that house's original purpose and the later myths until I showed him. The reason that hidden house was built was for a former wealthy farmer's lesbian daughter. Didn't have the heart to disown her, so he hid her away there in the late 60s. Because in the 60s, there were some wild parties out there and girls were quote-unquote converted to lesbianism. Already knew damn well they were gay. So of course, that small southern town assumed the devil was behind it. Story 4. Small UK town, man taken to hospital, passes away on arrival. Local news had announced that police were looking to speak to witnesses, then announced police have upgraded it to a serious investigation. A few days later, some guys are arrested in connection to the case. A couple of months pass and they're sentenced to prison for termination. That's all that was made public. Heard through some friends who have family working at the local hospital that the victim had serious injuries. Grapevine says he'd essayed the daughter of one of the guys who then terminated him. Story 5. So when I was in high school in a really small, mostly white town, 2 white girls a year ahead of me passed away in a car fire. Really awful and tragic. They were well-liked, fairly popular, and had plans to go to the state college. Quote-unquote tragic loss of potential was said a lot. The secret was how they came to be in the car. They were in the back seat of some 2-door sports car, 2 black boys of ill reputation in the front seat. Rumor goes they were going to pick up substances, but they crashed on a really remote road, hit gravel or something, and went into a tree. I don't know the specifics, but a fire started in the guy's ditch, leaving the girls trapped in the back seat. I think they were dazed from the crash, maybe substances, and couldn't get out before the smoke and flames ended them. Freaking awful. But no one ever really wanted these upstanding girls connected to thugs, so no one talked about it. But prior to all of this, I thought the guys were just innocent enough burnouts. I never would have thought they'd be capable of abandoning someone to pass away. Story 6. People in my town want to build a statue of a stupid man who was seen around town all the time waving at people. He's been doing it for decades. But in reality, the guy is really poor and no one helps him with living expenses or basic health or dental care. They're basically acting like he'd already passed away and are trying to raise money to honor him instead of raising money to do something nice for him while he's still alive. Story 7. My hometown has a famous user, i.e. everyone knows who he is. He's lived there for about 70 years and his crimes are town gossip. Most of the time, it's small stuff, stolen bikes, and once a canoe that he just leaves somewhere, living in a park when he doesn't feel like going home for a few days, stuff like that. He's mostly seen as a harmless, funny character. His brain is seriously damaged after hard substance use since his early teens. What is rarely mentioned is that when he still had a house, he used to steal dogs. Story 8. My small-town priest moved parishes to my church a few years ago. Seemed normal, yeah? Not until a few months ago when we found out he was sleeping with a married woman from the new parish he was at. The woman had kids that attended the school and her husband eventually found out, called the church, and he basically vanished. Found out recently he moved from his first parish because he was sleeping around with parishioners there as well, but they wanted to keep it low-key, so they just switched his parish. Story 9. Popular pediatric orthodontist is in jail now for having intimacy with his employees in exchange for substances. And when it came out, he admitted to being spiked while doing surgery most of the time. So this guy was taking turns on the tank while taking out my 4 impacted wisdom teeth. But he knows some people, so that story went away very quickly. Story 10. Canadian here. Our equivalent to CPS, Child Protective Services, is called CAS, Children's Aid Society here. Their entire office is a joke here, and for about a month a while back, it was impossible to do anything with them because they devoted the entirety of their resources to full-scale damage control. They had removed 4 kids from the home of a well-known user in town. Problem was, she had 5 kids. For some inconceivable reason, they removed all the olders and allowed her to keep the newborn, only a couple of weeks old. The CAS visit was prompted after a postnatal follow-up that was either questionable or missed entirely. I'm not super sure about that. The same freaking night that all the olders are removed, Mommy Dearest decides to spike herself before bed. While heavily asleep, an accidental shift in her position led to an accident of the baby. Their damage control worked too and never made the papers or anything as far as I've seen. The only reason I found out was because I was trying to help a friend deal with a cruel ex of hers, and when nothing was happening with the CAS, we went instead to the police. The officer we spoke to was more than happy to let us know why we'd never get anywhere with those incompetent schmucks. His words. Story 11. A guy from my grad year went missing about a year ago. There was a massive search in my small western British Columbian town. People freaking out left, right, and center, the whole shebang. It was a weird feeling. This guy was friends with a few really, really good friends of mine. Anyhow, so then somebody finds him driving nearby Edmonton, and it turns out he ran off because he knocked up a girl in my grad class. What was kind of crappy was how his parents failed to mention to the police that some of his clothes and belongings were missing. So that's basically like 90% of what people my age have been talking about. Story 12. So I was hanging out with this girl's family in rural western Maine, right near the Appalachian Trail. We were doing some shooting and sharing hunting stories, the usual. Then this one guy starts talking about messing with hikers on the trail, like shooting near their campsites at night, that kind of thing. He even told this really messed up story about finding an older woman camping, and, well, it was really disturbing stuff he claimed he did. The other guys were laughing, and I was just sitting there, totally shocked and not believing what I was hearing. Honestly, at that moment, I was just glad I had a shotgun nearby. It definitely made me realize you have to be careful out there, especially when you're hiking in remote areas. Story 13. In my mother's extown, there is a box full of automatic weapons and grenades buried somewhere. My grandfather had been a partisan in Italy during World War II, and at the end of the war, his unit, instead of handing arms to the government forces, decided to hide them in case the Soviets had invaded the country. Now he's gone, and with him also the position of the box. The only other person beside me and my mother who knows about the box is the last man alive of his unit. Story 14. Kinda late for the party, but anyway, the dude that stuck a perfume bottle to impress a girl on a webcam. My city ain't so small anymore, tripled the population in the last 20 years or so, but back when I was like 14 or 15, that dude was by far the most prominent urban legend in here. As it turned out, he wasn't that much of a legend as 100% real, and yes, he very much ended up in the hospital after the fact. Never met the guy personally, but one of my best friends and basically a big brother through my teen years was in the same class as him in high school. The bottle in question was shaped like a cigar, so it ain't as bad as you are picturing it, but it's still a bottle. Oh, and there's also the black utilitarian ghost car that ends people in the night, but that's probably just gangs. Story 15. Small town Saskatchewan. Resident doc is a good one, smart as heck, people like him, good doctor. Except he would never let nurses assist him with certain procedures. Turns out he was administering anesthesia to some of his patients to perform uncomfortable procedures and then doing stuff to them while they were sedated. Now, in case you're unaware, anesthesia has a pretty neat feature to it, in that it has a very potent memory loss property. You can be on it, fully sedated, yet aware of your surroundings, and 30 minutes later, you have zero recollection of the previous hour. It's also the reason he wasn't caught initially. One girl had a reputation for being a bit of a loose girl around town, goes to the cops one day and accuses this doc, says he's essayed her while she was sedated. The memory loss property did not work on her. She remembered everything. They do a test, find DNA, etc., and begin an investigation. Court orders the doc to provide a sample for DNA matching. Lab tech goes to take the sample, and doc insists she only use one arm specifically as he has a condition that causes his veins to be frail and susceptible to collapse due to venipuncture. Lab tech obliges but finds the sample very sluggish to draw. Eventually gets the sample, they run it, and lo and behold, no match for DNA. Lawyers go to work calling BS on why that was so hokey, and the court eventually orders a new test, this time under police supervision and without prior notification to the physician. Second draw comes back as a match for the DNA, and doc faces charges. Turns out this absolute madman of a physician had inserted a Penrose drain, basically a rubber tube, into his arm, filled the Penrose drain with someone else's sample from the lab, hit it with some heparin to prevent clotting, and convinced the lab tech to draw a sample from the Penrose drain. Dude was psychotically brilliant. I don't remember if he ended up doing time, but eventually he ran back to South Africa. Crazy thing is there's still people in that town who are adamant that he is innocent, many of whom worked with him. Story 16. I live in a super small town, see all the same people constantly. And back in the 80s, there was a group of guys my mom went to high school with who were rumored to have ended this poor old man in town and robbed his house blind of substances and nice belongings. They got away clean except for one of the idiots who decided to crap in the sink. The police collected the sample, but at the time, there wasn't the technology to find out who the crap belonged to. Well, around 10 to 15 years later, they finally had the technology and they tested that sample. They found out who it belonged to, and the guy ended up in prison after getting away with it for so long. Isn't it kind of weird to think of cops decades ago thinking, we'd better keep a sample of this guy's crap in the file, even though back then there was nothing they could actually really do with it? Story 17. Back in the 80s, they closed down the old middle school in my town and built a new one fairly close to it. Because the building wasn't that run down, they let the Little League grades 2 to 6 teams practice in the old school and leave big kids alone at the new school. I'm not really sure how, but a rumor started that there was a Satanist club underneath the gym. People claimed they could hear chanting and loud banging noises from under the floor, and it freaked everyone out, so the school mostly stopped using it. I found out the truth recently from my friend's mom. Apparently, some locals ran a club down there, and she knew because she went once just to see what it was like. They stopped after people started catching HIV. Story 18. This was about 15 years ago, my pretty large country hometown. Me and my friends would always mess around in the woods that were near some fields, just shooting off fireworks we stole from our parents or, just playing with cans of axes and lighters. One day, luckily, when I wasn't there, things got out of hand and all the fields caught on fire. This is a farming town, so a lot of these fields were connected and it soon rapidly spread to 50 acres of woods. On the upside, the fire actually helped clear out some old brush and made the land more fertile to grow on. Story 19. Canada. When the government opens crown land to cattle grazing, landowners have about a week to make sure their fences are good before the ranchers move their cattle. One wheat farmer in the small town didn't get to his fences in time. While fixing a fence, he got into an argument with the rancher whose cattle were on crown land and on his property eating his wheat. Turned violent, rancher ended up with a broken leg and was left in the woods by the farmer. He drags himself to his vehicle and calls for help on his CB radio, gets rescued. In the interim, the farmer confesses to his priests. Church decides to intervene. Church members convince the rancher and his family not to press charges. The church members become slave labor to the rancher while his leg heals, meals, house cleaning, repairs, gardening, etc. And this goes on for 3 or 4 months until the rancher is back on his feet. Freaks me out how far they will go to protect one of their own. Story 20. A kid in my grade tried to rob an old lady. I think she was like 98 years old and living by herself. After school one day, he went to her house and broke in through the back door. Apparently, she was going to be robbed without a fight and had a gun with her. As he went to disarm her, the gun went off and broke a window. He got the gun away from her and terminated her. He started to panic and hid her into a closet so no one would find her. A week or two later, the neighbors called the police because something smelled horrible and the police arrived and found her. I guess the kid went back and tried to make it easier to hide it. When the police finally recovered it, the autopsy showed that she might have been essayed. The kid just got a life sentence with no chance for parole. Story 21. It's not exactly a dark secret in the same sense as most of these because it's not a quote-unquote crazy scandal. But my hometown is one of those stereotypical suburban little Massachusetts towns, expensive homes, upper middle class, pretty much 100% white, the usual for the area. And people are just starting to realize that it's full of substances. Every single person I know knows at least 2 people who have coded and passed away, and that's not an exaggeration. I know 2 myself who were close family friends, plus another who passed away but was revived. It's sad as heck. My town started a campaign a while back to try to bring awareness to the epidemic. It seems like it's only getting worse. My town isn't unique. There are so many of the same stories, small towns with a dark secret. The opioid crisis in New England is a scary, depressing thing. Story 22. Not a dark secret, but this thread is getting too dark. My grandpa's favorite story was that he and a friend accidentally burnt down the town's ice house when they were 7. He always said that the town never knew. I was talking to one of his friends that grew up with him at grandpa's funeral. When I told him the story, he laughed and told me how it actually went down. The entire town knew what happened. However, due to their age and the fact that my grandpa and his friend put out the fire, they weren't held accountable. Many years later, my family found a newspaper detailing the event. My grandpa thought that no one knew he burnt down an ice house, but the entire town knew and let him live with the guilt. Story 23. We have a scenic cliffside really close to town where a lot of dog walkers go. It has established paths and fences as well as a road running 10 meters away from the edge. It's a hot spot for ending it all, but I only found out about it from a Coast Guard friend while she was intoxicated that they are always on the lookout. She said about 10 on average were found a year, which is massive for our small town. It was surreal because I had lived there my whole life and no one ever reported it or anything. There were Samaritan organizations that did patrols every now and then, but they were fairly quiet about it. Story 24. I had a friend who used to be very caring for everyone around in his life. He had a guy who used to be his classmate. They were kind of best friends. Once, the guy was upset and didn't come to class for more than a week. My friend called him up and asked where the heck he was. The guy mentioned he was on the bank of a river which flows through our city and was trying to end it all. My friend asked him to hold on. He took my bike keys and went to the guy to save his life, but he never returned. After 2 days of constantly searching for him, the police found him on the bank of the same river. The case was closed. But I will tell you the truth. This was a foolproof plan. The guy and my friend were in love with the same girl, so the guy planned to call him up to the place and pushed him into the river. Unfortunately, my friend didn't know how to swim, so he drowned. We have proof for what exactly happened and reopened the case, but we are just receiving the dates from the court, no judgment. And the guy is walking in the city like nothing ever happened. True story, my friend was very close to me even. I do miss him a lot, but helpless we are with the system and government. Hope his soul rests in peace. Story 25. My uncle was found after ending it all. There was empty beer cans scattered around him and he had 3 wounds, no note. Aside from the fact that he had a BAC of 0, it is puzzling that a person would be able to end it all 3 times. Possible, but with other weird things surrounding it, it is suspicious. Another uncle of mine found him after my uncle's estranged wife called and asked for someone to go check on him and to not bother calling her back if he was okay. Basically, the feeling of my family was that the estranged wife or her boyfriend ended him. However, my grandmother was elderly and in a home, and they didn't want her to see anything on the news because they just told her he passed away, so it was never fully investigated. The police did tell my family that they would be willing to reopen the case at any time. My grandmother passed away a few years later, but nobody pushed for a full, real investigation because my cousins only have their mother left. Story 26. Not mine, but my grandmother used to read coffee grinds for neighbors and friends, a form of fortune telling. She didn't believe in it, but it was a way to pass the time when she was a young mother back in the 50s and 60s. So one day she was reading a neighbor's grinds and said, "Oh, strange, it says you have a baby." The neighbor, who was a single female in the same conservative immigrant community as my grandmother, got skittish and said my grandmother was wrong. My grandmother was like, "Honey, no, look at this cup, that's a baby symbol," and her neighbor starts sobbing. Turns out she had gotten pregnant as an older teenager, been sent away to have the kid, and ended up giving the baby away to a married friend who lived across the country. And now my grandmother was the only one in town who knew. She stopped reading cups for years after that one. Way too awkward. Story 27. One of our city councilwoman's kids are not her husband's. He has no idea. My parents lived next door to the family for years. They had 2 kids around that same age as my brother and I. They also had major marital problems but kept a good public facade. Husband was 30 years older than the wife and had kids from a prior marriage. I guess one night, over way too much wine, councilwoman got some loose lips. She confessed to my mom that her husband didn't want kids, but she really wanted them. She didn't want to wait and get divorced and married again, so she went to a bank, picked a donor that physically matched her husband, and did artificial insemination. Twice. Got pregnant, both times. Told her husband that her pill must have failed and claimed she didn't realize until it was too late to get a termination. At the time she told this to my mom, the kids were 21 and 19. My mom didn't really know what to do, so she kind of kept her mouth shut until she blabbed to me several years later. And if you're getting a kick out of at least one of these stories so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. All right, so let's keep the show rolling. Story 28. If you're one of the richest billionaires in America, you can literally get away with crimes if you live in a small town. Alice Walton, heiress to the Walmart fortune, ended Oleta Hardin while speeding in Fayetteville, Arkansas in 1989. She was never charged, and given that she has a long history of driving intoxicated, it's highly likely she was intoxicated when she ended that poor woman. In 1998, Alice totaled her SUV in Springdale, Arkansas when she hit a gas meter and a phone booth. She was charged with driving while intoxicated. Ultimately, she had to pay a $928 fine. Her last DUI was in 2011. It was expunged from her record because the prosecutor somehow forgot to charge her for 2 years, thus exceeding the statute of limitations. You can buy a lot of influence when you're the richest woman in America and you live in a heavily impoverished section of the country, something well worth contemplating next time you consider shopping at your local Walmart. Well, at least the gas meter and phone booth got some justice in 1998. $928 worth of justice. Just keeping things light, folks. Story 29. I'm not sure how dark or secretive this is, but it's still an amusing small town story. Anyway, during my senior year of high school, I was looking to get a job for the summer before college. Several of my friends worked at the local ice cream/rest stop, so I asked my friend Mike if he thought he could help me get a job there. He looked into it but returned with the news that they weren't hiring. Later that summer, the shop closed down, so I asked Mike what the deal was. He relayed to me that it was really just a matter of time due to the owner's management style, that being chronic alcoholism and a severe gambling fixation. She ran her establishment off of the contributions of her wealthy husband while she wasted away all the revenue at the local casino or getting intoxicated. Her husband finally had enough and cut her off and had her shut down the store. Apparently, she would regularly screw things up in the kitchen and blame all her teenage employees. Also, she'd force them to add jalapenos to the sandwich orders of any Hispanic patrons, claiming, "No, they love it, put it on anyway." One time, she even whizzed herself and adamantly refused it despite the indisputable odor and wet pants. So yeah, I'm kind of glad I worked at Subway that summer. Story 30. There is a large section of pine barrels that is fenced off with multiple authorized access, trespassing, etc. posted about it. The fence is in the shape of a triangle. Each leg of the triangle goes for a good 300 to 400 yards. There's no roads leading to it, no gates or openings, Constantine wire up top running the entire length. We've noticed 2 very concealed cameras while walking the perimeter. I'm sure there are more of those. It's a good 2 miles from the closest fire trail and even further to any roads. Everybody we've asked about it says they never heard of it. Who knows, maybe it's fenced in a sewage drain pond or something. The lack of access is the weirdest part though. They are definitely trying to keep someone out or something in. Cue X-Files song. Story 31. Won't share too many details because the place is still currently operating and the people doing it are honestly so morally devoid. I wouldn't put any kind of retaliatory action beyond them. Basically, there's a few houses in this small town nearby that are well-known trafficking sites. There's one landlord who owns a majority of the property in the small town, and he acts as the central figure in the operation. He fills the houses with gang members that are frequently seen with children. Adults are videotaped coming to these properties with a child. They walk in with a kid, come out without it, and just leave, never to come back. Children are videotaped coming out of the house, getting in a car, and never seen again. Children are videotaped entering one of the houses, acting normal, and coming out looking like they are on the verge of passing out. The crazy thing is, it gets crazier, is that it's very public knowledge thanks to a website dedicated to the subject created by one of the last remaining non-gang members who lives on the same block as these houses. Whoever this person is, they've installed cameras outside of their house looking at these other places. They capture video evidence of these different children and compare them to film captured a week ago or days, and show all the different children that they've captured on film going in or leaving and never seen again. They have photos of the gang members coming right up to their cameras and smirking, making obscene gestures, flipping them off, etc. This person also tells their story about how that central landlord figure in his gang have tried to forcibly make them leave by poison gassing. She talks about, with photographic evidence, how the gang members attach sprayers onto the back of their cars and drive back and forth past their house spraying odorless, invisible pesticide, which makes the very air hurt to breathe. They talk about how their dog, once perfectly healthy, has come to be plagued with terrible bronchial problems and can hardly breathe. They say they have to keep their windows tightly shut and sealed or else it becomes too much to handle. It's honestly insane and very real and scary. Story 32. It turns out the small town I lived in during high school played a pivotal role in Army intelligence during World War II. What is now a vacant plot of land used to be a psych hospital. I know this because it still existed during high school and had an abandoned wing heavily guarded, which sophomore kids tried to break into after dark as initiation. Not many could, but my group just so happened to be lucky enough. There was a network of underground tunnels connecting each building. Some were flooded, while others weren't. The tunnels and rooms were in a hurry-and-go state, as if everyone had 10 minutes to vacate the building. There were medical files, medical tools, dirty sheets, and preserved jars of human anatomy scattered all over the place. So how was this tied to Army intelligence? There were Army insignias and stamps all over paperwork left behind. Not only that, the wayfinding in the tunnels and some medical records were written in German, as well as black and white photos of patients and their uniforms could be found. One of the kids in my group understood the language and pointed this out. Further research into this, we found the facility brought in German POWs and performed stress tests on them. The tunnels were set up as mazes to mess with them and study how they performed. The maze study made sense as no one could get a copy of the building's blueprints from public record. By all accounts, the tunnels didn't exist. Venturing through, we certainly got lost. Kids before us that managed to make spray-painted navigational markings to get back out. Quote-unquote maps were passed around that were being passed off as the real thing with legends of this one school finding new areas. It made for great fun that a movie should be made of, but the reality of what we all encountered was definitely something the authorities didn't want to be made public. The abandoned facility mysteriously burned down 1 year later, and a huge army of bulldozers appeared the next day, cleaning up the debris without a formal investigation. Story 33. When I was growing up, my neighbor owned a car body shop and had a wife and one son. They were prominent people in this tiny town for some reason. We lived next door to them for many years, and my parents still live there. The man and his wife have passed away now, and I learned that the body shop owner got his mistress pregnant before he and his wife had their son. The mistress had a son. His wife found out about the baby and made him reject it entirely and then get her pregnant immediately. So then they had their one son, who they spoiled rotten. Even when the man passed away, there was no mention of the first son in the obituary. None of the wealth left to him. He was completely rejected and denied by his quote-unquote upstanding father. Story 34. High school boy ended his sister while driving intoxicated out on farm roads. He became essentially the town pariah but wouldn't leave the area. Worked at the local grocery store as a bagger, never did move up. Nobody ever acknowledged him other than to give him dirty looks, even years later. I don't remember anyone ever actually discussing why everyone hated him, but we all seem to know anyway, even the newcomers. Story 35. In the town my father grew up in, his uncle had 2 daughters. One of the daughters was essayed by 2 men that were pretty big figures in the town. My great uncle finds out and doesn't go to the police. My family is pretty into stuff, as one would say, so they decided to deal with it themselves. 2 weeks later, one of the men is found in the woods. The other guy is said to have skipped town after the incident. Everyone knows he's probably somewhere in the hundreds of acres that my uncle owns. My family also happens to be pretty good friends with the local law enforcement, and everyone knows the man essayed the girl. Sheriff rules it as gang-related and says the man was involved with the cartel. My uncle still brags about this. It's pretty well known that he did it, and the local saying is, "Don't mess with my last name, girls." Story 36. Down the street from the house I live in is a forest with a disused gravel road going into it. And if you follow the road, there's an abandoned house inside the forest with all the furniture and stuff still inside. When I was a kid, that place was our secret fort. My friends and I used to go and play there all the time until my mom told me what that place actually was. You see, going back during Vietnam, one of my mom's school friends lived there with her husband and 3 kids. A bunch of young guys, including her husband, ended up going to the war. Unfortunately, her husband was ended out there, grieving and without money or a job. The young woman ended her children and then herself. The place is owned by her mother now. Never ever went back to that place. Story 37. A cold case? A couple was ended in 1990 and it has never been solved. Why? The husband tried to drop out of a gang, essentially, and the group didn't like that. He knew too much info. So they went to the house in the middle of the night and ended them. Left the wife in front of the front door and made it look like the husband did it. Worst part about the whole story, most of the members in the house the night of the crime were police officers off duty. Can't go to the cops with the information, so I just kind of try to forget I know about it. Story 38. My family's from a small town in insert South Pacific nation, and the strangest one I know is the story of my dad being attacked during my parents' engagement story. Everyone knows that my dad almost got ended that day, but no one outside the family knows why. So my dad and mom had an arranged marriage, and my mom flew in with her family from Canada for her engagement ceremony to my dad. This man shows up and attacks my dad during the ceremony with a knife, from what I heard, and no one outside the family knows why. Everyone just knew there was a warrant out for him and that he fled the country. It turns out that this man is my mom's cousin and was mad that my grandfather said no to his proposal that he marry my mom, was my mom's cousin through her mom's side because, well, that's some weird crap right there. So my grandfather told the cousin to kick rocks and that my mom's going to marry my dad instead. So he flies from Canada to country and tries to end my dad because he blames him for not being able to marry my mom. Also, my mom was 15 at the time and the cousin showed up when I was 8 and tried to end my dad again. Story 39. Backstory: I grew up in a very backwoods, redneck, racist piece of crap town. A girl my sister's age, we'll call her Kay, disappeared around 1998. Like, completely. They sent search teams out for months. I live in a town that is 75% national forest. She was last seen leaving work from the only major grocery store in the town. Everyone talked about it for years, saying she was probably ended. Most people said it was because she was interracial. Like I said, horrible town. Fast forward to my sister's senior year, a girl gets taken from the same grocery store parking lot where she also worked and was essayed. She said she didn't want to go to the police because the guys that did it told her if she said anything, they would make her disappear like they made Kay disappear. She went to them anyway, and literally nothing happened. They never served time. Fast forward to my senior year in high school, 13 years later, a group of teenagers were four-wheeling really deep in the forest and came across the departed Kay. Everyone still thinks it's the same two guys, but there has never been enough evidence for the family to press charges. I'm so glad I don't live there anymore. That town was full of horrible people, very much the boys will be boys mentality. Story 40. Back in the 1940s, there was a termination of a black man that only the older blacks in town mention. I guess it's the typical story of a black man supposedly whistling or speaking to a white woman. He gets arrested, an angry mob forms outside prison, and they release him to the mob. I've asked around to the older blacks, and a lot of them remember it or their parents told them of it. But when I've asked the older whites, generally the same age, almost none of them have heard of it. There were a few who did, and they would just say it was different times or say the details aren't fully known. Story 41. I live in a small town deep in the English countryside. There was a forest near the main part of our little village where people would walk their dogs or just go for a stroll. But at nighttime, no one would dare go there. There was a man, who we all referred to as the Duke, who took people into the forest and had intimacy with them. Me and my friend went for a late-night drive once and saw a bunch of cars parked in the forest. We decided to park as well and sit in the dark for a while. We see another truck drive in and weird-looking people come out of the pitch-black forest to chat with them. We saw this huge fat man who seemed to be organizing this woodland event, and we knew straight away that he was the Duke. Some people started walking up to our car after a while. We don't know if they saw us or not, but we sped out of there and they chased us down the road. We got away, thankfully. I haven't been back since, but I've heard that he's still active and holds a lot of leeway in the village. Story 42. When we moved to the small town I grew up in, my mother was single and needed a place to watch me and my brother. I was going into first grade and my brother was in preschool. We were little. We ended up being watched by this lady who did in-home childcare. Way too many kids in her big ranch-style home on a plot of land at the edge of the town. Her husband was mayor and sold used cars for a living from a tiny lot on the edge of the property. She got away with having way too many kids in an unlicensed facility and an adult son who would come scare us kids, especially me. He liked to chase me around the house with a knife. My mother found out and threatened him if he came around again. We didn't stay with them just too much longer after that, but longer than I cared for. There just weren't any other options available. They had a lot of money and influence in town, way too much for a used car salesman. The guy kept his adult son out of prison, built his daughter a new house when she got married right out of high school on another end of the property, kept his wife in new cars and nice things, even got a local bank branch open with his influence. Now, how did he manage that? By smuggling substances in the cars he would bring up from South Texas. Had a nice racket for a number of years. Finally got out of the business. My mom sees him around town now and again. Story 43. Back around 84, I began working at a power plant in North Alabama. The local news at the time was filled with the news that the notorious Dalton family had finally been brought down. All day long, there was news of how this particular family had run and terrorized an entire South Alabama county since the 1930s. There was also footage of them being handcuffed and shoved into squad cars. And believe me, these guys look like everybody's idea of a backwoods country person, long beards, overalls, you name it. The next day at work, I was laughing about it and asked out loud, how the hell did a family of country people get to run and terrorize an entire county for so long? All of a sudden, the entire office got quiet. It was then that I realized I was an outsider to Alabama and that my use of the word country person may have crossed the line. After a few moments of awkward silence, someone spoke up and said, name withheld, there is one of the Daltons. I looked at him. A silent look on his face told me that this was no joke. I immediately began profusely apologizing and trying to convince him I meant no harm. He sheepishly said, that's all right. That's why my daddy moved us away from there. They were all trash. Story 44. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had two girls I was trying to get special ed services for in school. The school is considered to be the best in the area, and the population is exploding because of this, a small town. Anyway, I had to do a lot of research to find out that this school, in fact, all schools in the USA, are very corrupt when it comes to special ed services. They really fight back to not help. They would rather spend thousands of dollars taking parents to court, drag it on for years, when they could have just used that money and went on and helped the child. I finally got fed up with the fight and took my youngest out of school. Less than a year later, this was in 2006, the only school employee that was nice through this whole ordeal was just doing his job. He was the school psychologist and did testing to see if kids qualified for special ed. The SPED director was horrible and intimidated everyone. He got fed up with the psychologist doing his job and made up lies about him and told the school superintendent. The superintendent told the psychologist, "Don't worry, I got your back." Well, instead, he turned the psychologist into the state school ethics board. The psychologist ended it all, and the whole special ed department was cleaned out and started over with new employees. This was not made public whatsoever. Story 45. There was a pretty well-off family in my town. They were all involved in all kinds of crap like the city council, school board, etc., which ensured they had a good reputation and lots of connections. Well, one day, their house burned down. Not just a fire, an explosion that blew almost an entire wall down. They said it was a gas fireplace malfunction. The whole town knew it was a substance lab explosion because their youngest son was an idiot and couldn't keep a secret. A year or so later, their new home was being watched, and the dad was eventually taken in on some pretty serious dealing charges. But the official story about their home is still that their fireplace blew up. And if any of these stories got to you, at least one of them, here's more for you because YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video. Thanks for watching.